Genesis chapter 20. We skipped a week last week, which is okay because the week before that we finished a section. We finished the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Thankfully, I didn't really want to do a 10-part series on the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, so we rushed a tiny bit through that. But if you're new here on Wednesday nights, or if you're relatively new, we've just been going through the book of Genesis, and we've landed in chapter 20 so far. Chapter 20 is where we are right now. So before we can talk about chapter 20, we have to do a little bit of context. And you guys have, ate so much turkey, I can just tell that it's just taking some of the biblical knowledge out of your head. So I got to bring it back. I could tell. Or ham. Who ate more ham? I had too much ham. Okay. So in chapter 18, Abraham had 3 visitors. And the 3 visitors told him a couple of important pieces of information. One of those, pertaining to what we studied the last 2 weeks, was that Sodom and Gomorrah were so wicked that God was going to address that situation. And He did. We saw that 2 weeks ago. The other piece of information that they were told in chapter 18 is that in 1 year, Abraham and Sarah were going to have a child. From Abraham's body, from Sarah's body. Abraham at that time is 100 years old. Sarah, 90 years old. Okay, so or 89 and 99. Okay, so Sarah laughs at that, and she's rebuked for laughing. But at the same time, you kind of got to go, well, that's kind of hard to believe. So that's the context we're in. Then we have the Sodom and Gomorrah saga that interjects in there. And so we kind of land back in that storyline with the promise of a child within the next year for Abraham and Sarah. In chapter 20, they do a little more traveling. And this is what we're going to have is a little bit of a rerun, okay, tonight. We're going to see something that seems really familiar to us because something very similar has already happened. We're going to see another sinful episode, unfortunately, in Abraham's life. Nobody likes to see the heroes fall, and that's what we kind of see. We see our hero stumble a little bit tonight, and we will look at that. You know, it's easy to be critical of Abraham because you and I have never had to learn the same lesson twice, have we? We've never maybe struggled with the same sin issue for a period of time. We've never had these little reruns, these little episodes that come back on. They're all too familiar in our life, have we? And I think it's a little bit of a lesson to be learned from Abraham kind of repeating this same sin. And it's this, that the sins that we've maybe dabbled with in our history are going to be more easy for us to fall into again. So if it's even before you were saved, before you became a believer, if there was some particular issue that you were involved in, listen, after you're a believer, it might be more easy for you to stumble back into that sin than it would be for somebody else. I'll give you an example. Somebody who maybe was in a lifestyle of just drunkenness before they were saved. You know, going to bars, nightclubs, and liquor stores and all that kind of stuff. That person gets saved and puts all that away. Guess what? They have a familiarization with those places, don't they? They know what it's like to walk into a liquor store and buy something. They know what it's like to go into a bar and order something. They know that. So it's going to be easier, perhaps, for them to slide. Do that. So I say that not to condemn anybody for the life you lived before you were saved, but just as a word of warning. I mean, if you have those areas, just know that you may have a higher propensity to stumble back into areas that you've been familiar with and you've struggled with in the past. And maybe that's what we see here with Abraham. He stumbles back into an old way of lifestyle. And so let's read the text this evening, and you'll see what I mean if you were here for chapter 12, or if you're familiar with it. Chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "From there, Abraham traveled to the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While he was staying in Gerar, Abraham said about his wife Sarah, 'She is my sister.' So King Abimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him." So we saw this in chapter 12. It was in Egypt, and it was the same situation. It was Pharaoh that time instead of Abimelech. And that's Episode 1, chapter 12. Episode 2 is here in chapter 20. Episode 3 also takes place, but it's Abraham's son, Isaac, in chapter 26, who does almost the exact same thing as well. This guy, Abimelech, is a king. He's a Philistine king. And Abimelech means the king is my father. So it's more of a title. So Philistine kings were called Abimelech, like a pharaoh. A king of Egypt would be called Pharaoh or something along those lines. More of a title. Verse 3, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, you are about to die because of the woman you have taken, for she is a married woman. Now Abimelech had not approached her. So he said, Lord, would you destroy a nation even though it is innocent? Didn't he himself say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. I did this with a clear conscience and clean hands. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you did this with a clear conscience. I have also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I have not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, know that you will certainly die, you and all who are yours. Early in the morning, Abimelech got up and called all of his servants together and personally told them all these things, and they were terrified. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said to him, what have you done to us? How did I sin against you that you have brought such enormous guilt on me and on my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done. Abimelech also asked Abraham, what made you do this? So, take a quick break there and talk about it just for a moment. Same situation as in chapter 12. For some reason, Abraham leaves where he's living and travels. Now in chapter 12, it was because of a famine. Remember, a severe famine hit the land. But here in chapter 20, we don't know why he traveled. Likely has something to do with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Maybe just a desolate place after fire rained down on everything. And so Abraham thought it was maybe time to leave. But regardless, he winds up in Gerar, which we don't have a present-day understanding of where that is, but we know this is a Philistine area. Once again, he tells his wife to tell people as they travel, she is my sister. She's my sister. That's what he tells people. And once again, a foreign king takes Sarah as his wife. Now, this is remarkable for a few reasons. The first time it happened, Sarah was 65 years old. And the text says, gorgeous, knockout. Her beauty, the word of her beauty spread to Pharaoh. Now, this is 25 years later. She's 90. That couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, that's right, you know. I hope they pick that up in the recording for YouTube. That'll be great. Yeah, so, man, you just got to think. Wow, she must have really been a beautiful woman and really just a knockout. That even at the age of 90, people are coming to snatch her away and marry her up. Now, it's possible it was just for the sake of an alliance. You know, throughout the Bible and throughout history, people would align themselves through marriage. Right? So that is to say, if a king were to give another king his daughter in marriage, they could be relatively assured that the king wouldn't come and wage war against his daughter's homeland now, or the place where his blood relative lived. And so that might have been part of the motivation here. More of an alliance. Remember, Abraham was big. Abraham had 318 trained soldiers that lived in his home and served his people, plus all the other servants and the children, the women, and everything that traveled with him. And so it could have been for the sake of an alliance. But over and over, the text goes out of its way in other places to tell us how beautiful Sarah was. And even at 90 years old, Mama still had it going on, I guess. All right? So it's the same old sin, same old problem. Verse 3 is interesting because it really presents the situation, the problem in those first two verses. Verse 3, very quickly, it tells you who's really at work here. And it says, but God. And it's one of those but God verses. And it's one of those verses that tells you that despite man's actions and behavior and unfaithfulness, God is still at work. God is still working to fulfill the promises that He has made to Abraham and to Sarah. But God, we see another one in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. It's when Joseph finally comes out and tells his brothers who he is, not just a governor in Egypt, but their flesh and blood who they sold off into slavery. And he says, you meant it for evil, but God used it for good. God was still at work, even though you had evil intentions. But God, another one of those but God verses, probably one of my favorites is in Ephesians chapter 2. And it says this, that we too all previously lived among them in our fleshly desires, carrying out the inclinations of our flesh and thoughts, and were by nature children under wrath, as others were also. But God, who is rich in mercy, because of His great love for us, made us alive with Christ, even though we were dead in our trespasses. You are saved by grace. Despite our evil actions and despite our efforts to do everything but follow God, God, in His loving kindness and mercy, acted on our behalf by sending His Son Jesus to pay the price for our sins so that we could be made right with Him once and for all. God is still at work, even when man is not. God is still faithful, even when man is unfaithful. And so He says to Abimelech in a dream. He comes to Abimelech in a dream. And he tells him, you're about to die. How would you like to have a dream where God comes to you and tells you, there's not enough unisom in the world to get you back to sleep after that one, right? And so he says, you're a dead man sleeping. That's what he tells him. It's a matter of time. Because, here's what he tells him, you are about to die because you have a woman who you have taken in your home, and she is a married woman. Verse 4 says, there's a little parenthetical note. Verse 4 is a little parenthetical note. Now, now Abimelech had not approached her. Okay, so that means what you think it means. Okay, it means approach for sexual activity. All right, that's what it means. He has not known her in a biblical sense, and that's what's meant there. And actually, the text here is going to say that about 4 times in this one chapter. Very specifically. It wants you to know nothing happened here. And it's very important. Very, very important. Why is that very important? Because Sarah's about to have a baby. Whose baby is it going to be? It's really important that you understand it's not Abimelech's baby. Isaac is not the child of Abimelech. Isaac is the child of Abraham according to God's promise. And so our text tonight is going to tell us several times he took her into his home, but nothing had happened yet, okay? And Abimelech kind of pleads his case. He says, now, listen, would you destroy a nation even though it was innocent? So the implication is that Abimelech knows that it's not just him that's going to suffer for this, but his whole nation. He's the king. The whole nation's going to suffer for this situation. He says, didn't he himself say to me, she's my sister? He told me she's my sister. She told me he's my brother. How was I supposed to know? And then God said to him, I know, because I'm God. No, he didn't say that, but, you can imagine. You did it with a clear conscience, or I think literally it's integrity of heart. Clear conscience is how it's translated in the CSB. And I've also kept you from sinning against me. That's an interesting sentence, isn't it? I have kept you from sinning against me. It's not just that you decided that you'd wait a couple of days or you've been busy, you had a lot on your mind, and that's why you hadn't gotten around to consummating the new marriage with Sarah. No. It's because I kept you. I kept you. I was at work. And he says, I've kept you from sinning against Abraham? No, he says, I have kept you from sinning against me. Now, adultery is a sin against your spouse. The Bible talks about sexual immorality being a sin against your own body. And I would also contend that, fornication or premarital sexual activity is a sin against your future spouse. But all that aside, all sin, including adultery, is ultimately a sin against God. And that's what he says, I have kept you from sinning against me. And he's at work. He's at work in what maybe seemed like little mundane things in Abimelech's life that had just gotten in the way of him getting to what he was going to get to with Sarah, but it's actually God at work in his life. Now, then God said to him, I know, I've kept you from sinning against me, therefore I have not let you touch her. Now, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet. Oh, that's just interesting. And he will pray for you, and you will live. Well, that's interesting. By the way, first time the word prophet's used in the Bible, right there. Isn't that interesting? First person referred to as a prophet is Abraham in the Bible. So, boy, that's interesting. So this is interesting because a prophet is one who speaks for God. God speaks to the prophet speaks to the people. That's how that works. Okay? But in this situation, God speaks in a dream to a Gentile and tells him to go speak to a prophet. It's crazy. It's crazy. And then he says, and you're going to die unless you do that, and then you got to get him to pray to me and ask me to not kill you. And when he asks me not to kill you, I won't kill you. That's wild, huh? That's what's happening here. And so it says, verse 8, early in the morning, Abimelech got up. Well, wouldn't you? I mean, come on. That's a nightmare. You're going to die, right? That's what he hears in a dream from God. And he called all of his servants together and personally told them all these things. And the men were terrified. Terrified. You know how, when you have a dream, and it can be so terrifying, but then you tell somebody else your dream, your nightmare, and it sounds so silly, right? That's usually how it goes. And then out of nowhere, a clown pops up, or something like that. You know what I'm talking about, right? And then you're like, wow, that is crazy. Why was I so scared? That is crazy. This is not what happens. They hear this and they go, oh my goodness. Why do you think that is? I have an idea. Is it possible that word of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah has traveled all the way to Gerar, wherever that is? And they go, oh, Abraham's God? Abraham's God said that you're going to die? And they're terrified of Abraham's God. It's ironic. In just a moment, you'll see why. He gets up and he tells him. So Abimelech then approaches Abraham. Why have you done this? How did I sin against you that you brought this on me? What made you do this? It's he asks him the same thing over and over. And Abraham replies in verse 11, and I'll just interject there. Abraham then gives a list of excuses. That's what this is, just so you know. Abraham said, I thought there is absolutely no fear of God in this place. They will kill me because of my wife. Now, first of all, right off the bat there, I thought. That was Abraham's problem right there. You ever had one of those bosses that would tell you, listen, I don't pay you to think? This is one of those situations. Not his job to think. It's his job to be faithful. It's his job to believe, to trust God. It's not his job to come up with a plan. God's got the plan. It's his job to go to God and get the plan, but it's not his job to come up with a plan. Now, thinking's not bad. You say, Pastor, it's not bad to think. The Bible talks a lot about wisdom. That's right. And what's the beginning of wisdom? The fear of the Lord, right? So Abraham said, these people absolutely have no fear of God. And so he came up with a plan. That's ironic, right? Because the only people here in this story who demonstrate any fear of the Lord is who? The Philistines, the people he said certainly have no fear of the Lord. Because they were terrified when they heard about the dream of Abimelech. And he says, you have no fear of the Lord, so I will not act in the fear of the Lord? You have no fear of the Lord. These people don't really fear the Lord. And so I'll act contrary to what a person who fears the Lord should act. I'll lie. He's just witnessed the consequences of sin in Sodom and Gomorrah. He's had the same situation play out in chapter 12 with Pharaoh in Egypt and saw the consequences for that. And it was embarrassing to say the least. And so, because these people don't fear the Lord, I'm not going to act in a way that fears the Lord. I'm going to act fearful. Isn't that interesting? So it's kind of ironic, but that's what he blames it on. Besides, she really is my sister. That's creepy. Verse 12. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. So it's his half-sister. And, it was ancient times. They did that kind of stuff back then. But you know what that's called? That's called a half-truth. Right? And, what did your teacher or your mom or your grandmama tell you about half-truths? They are whole lies, right? A half-truth is a whole lie. Well, technically, if you have to say that, you're lying, right? You're being dishonest. You're intentionally causing someone to misunderstand the situation. And that's what he did. She is my sister. No, she isn't. She's your wife. Period. And he leaves that out altogether. Half-truth, whole lie. And so, Abraham, and we'll get to that in just a second. He has his plan. Besides, she's really my sister. So when God, verse 13, so when God had me wander from my father's house, I said to her, show your loyalty to me wherever we go, and say about me, he's my brother. So that's part of that thinking, right? That's part of the scheming. That's part of the planning. It's not that, just in the spur of the moment, there was a situation and I just responded and I went, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. No, this was the plan all along. This was a scheme. It was when God called them out of Ur of the Chaldeans. He said, as we travel along, listen, here's what we're going to do. You tell people you're my sister, not my wife, because you're too pretty and they'll kill me to marry you. This is the plan. This is a plan for many, many years. This is a strategy. It's not that. He doesn't answer with this. Well, listen, Abimelech, I know you're mad, but I prayed about it. And God told me to tell you, no. He doesn't say that. He says, I thought about it. I had a little scheme worked up, and this is what we decided to do. To lie, to bear false witness. Not to trust God, but to come up with our own plan. And that's what he does here. Notice also, by the way, and I'll just let me backtrack just a second here. You notice a little bit of a blame shift? I'm going to just point that out because it seems really relevant. He says that there's no fear of God in this place. So why did you lie and tell me she's your sister? Well, because you people don't fear the Lord. You lied because we don't fear. So that see how he puts the blame on Abimelech and his people? He makes excuses. Technically it's just a half lie. It's an excuse. It's your fault, it's not my fault. Well, technically it's true. That's an excuse. And the problem with making excuses is you can never repent as long as you make excuses. You block yourself from repenting by making excuses. The only way to repent is to do what? Own it. Own it. You're right. You're right. I made this plan. I told her that. I shouldn't have. He doesn't really do that. So he says, listen, God made me wander. I made this plan. And that's what we went with. In verse 14, then Abimelech took flocks and herds and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham and returned his wife to him. Abimelech said, look, my land is before you. Settle wherever you want. And he said to Sarah, look, I'm giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a verification of your honor to all who are with you. You are fully vindicated. So just really quickly, I would think why would you give Abraham flocks and money and all that? So what we see here is restitution. There's been an offense. It's not really Abimelech's fault, but he still makes restitution for it. He gives them flocks and herds. And this is what happened too back in Egypt. Remember? They had the plagues on Pharaoh and his house. And so he gives them a bunch of riches and says, just get out of here. Just run. Just get out of Egypt. But Abimelech doesn't say that. I think it's interesting. Abimelech says, look at my land before you. Take any land you want. So he tells him he can stay in the country. Matter of fact, he wants him to stay in the country. Why is that? I think Abimelech understands and believes the Abrahamic covenant more than Abraham believes the Abrahamic covenant. See, the Abrahamic covenant, he says, I will curse those who curse you. I will bless those who bless you. So what we've seen in this chapter is collateral damage because of the sin of Abraham. Collateral consequences. But Abimelech understands this is a prophet of God. This is a godly man. And so there could be collateral blessing if he stays in my land. I could be blessed because he is so blessed just by being in proximity of him. It's something that Potiphar understood about Joseph. Remember Joseph? Everything in Potiphar's house prospered under Joseph's control. And so he's smart. He doesn't kick him out. He doesn't run him out of town. He says, listen, here's some land, or here's some money, here's some flocks and herds, and you pick anywhere you want to live. You can have it. And then he also speaks to Sarah. And it's funny because he says, look, I am giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. He doesn't say your husband. I think that's a little bit of a slap in the face, right? Listen, I'm giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. And this is for the sake of her honor. So by Abraham accepting this money, he's essentially saying that her honor, her integrity is still intact, that nothing happened. They're just kind of certifying it with this payment. Abraham receives that money. It's a sealed deal. Everybody will know. Listen, nothing happened. So, like I said, the text goes out of its way to make sure we understand nothing happened between Sarah and Abimelech. And so then it says, in verse 17, then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, his female slaves, so that they could bear children. For the Lord had completely closed all the wombs in Abimelech's household on account of Sarah, Abraham's wife. This is some of the collateral consequences that were taking place because of Abraham's sin. People were unable to bear children. Barrenness, which is an appropriate punishment given Sarah's situation. And so Abraham prays. Once again, listen, I'm not going to release you of this punishment until you talk to Abraham and Abraham asks me to release you. When Abraham prays, then I will listen, then I'll do it. It tells you maybe a little bit of the power of prayer. I mean, think about Abraham's prayer life up to this point. Chapter 18, he goes back and forth with God over the destruction of Lot, the righteous being swept up with the wicked. And he prevails. I mean, God rescues Lot. Here, God uses his prayer to heal this man and his whole family. God, why you got to do that? Why not just listen? As soon as you do what I told you to do, I'll release it. Why does he make Abraham ask him? He has to ask Abraham to ask me. Why does he do that? Well, I don't know. Why does God ask us to pray at all? Right? I mean, God knows your thoughts. He knows what you want and need. Why pray? Why do you have? He's all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-powerful. Why does he want you and I to pray? Why do we gather here and do prayer requests? Why are we commanded to do that in the Bible if God knows? Well, reliance on him, dependence on him. We need to know where our blessings come from. We need to know that we have a partner. We have somebody we can go to. We're never alone, that he's always there, that he is able. And Abraham needed a little reminder of that. And probably you and I do too. And maybe you might be praying about something right now, and you think, God, I've been praying about it. You know I need this, and I've been praying about it, and I'm keep praying about it. And you think, why hasn't God answered yet? Well, maybe He's trying to teach you that. Maybe He's trying to show you where it comes from. Make sure you know. Maybe trying to keep you from putting together a strategy or a plan to accomplish it on your own, by your own means, and maybe trying to teach you to trust Him. That seems to be the problem here. So, unfortunately, we see the patriarch Abraham, and we see his testimony tarnished once again. We see him being rebuked by a Gentile king, the father of the Jewish people, the father of God's chosen people, being rebuked by a Gentile for the second time. And it's terrible. But we also see the true hero of the story. Not Abraham, not Abimelech, not Sarah. We see God. We see God at work, God being faithful to Abraham in the middle of Abraham's unfaithfulness, in spite of his unfaithfulness. God's still at work when Abraham's not at work. In spite of what Abraham has done wrong. In spite of his distance from God. You can't be doing these things and being close to God, okay? So we can infer he's distant from God in his heart at this point. And yet, even in the distance, even in his backslidden state, God is still working on his behalf. Still being faithful to continue to keep the promises He's made to Abraham. That's good news. That's good news. So God's the hero in every story. Sometimes we have an earthly hero, but oftentimes in the Bible, our earthly heroes stumble and they fall and they make mistakes. And Abraham's, we've seen his sins kind of pile up a little bit here. It seems like in our minds. We think the same thing about David. David did some bad things, and he's still called a man after God's own heart. And that may be a little troubling in our minds to wrap our minds around. How can these guys do these kind of terrible things and yet still be seen as faithful, godly men? Well, that's maybe troubling in our minds. It's good for us in our hearts. Because we know we've all failed. We've all stumbled. We've all had to learn that lesson twice, but only twice, right? Never 3 times. Never 4 or 5 times, right? Definitely not. No, not us. Yeah, but God is still faithful. God is still faithful. God is still acting according to His promises. Still working all things for the good of those who love Him, who've been called according to His purpose. And that's me. Is that you? Hope so. Hope so.